Hey guys, welcome back to more Entitled Karen Reddit stories. Imagine a new neighbor moving in with 6 vehicles and immediately turning your shared driveway into her personal parking lot. Bad, right? Well, now imagine she sends you a formal cease and desist letter claiming the driveway is hers and banning you from parking at your own house. Big mistake, let me tell you. And the first one is titled, Karen tries to steal my driveway to have more parking spots for her huge family, but I take hers instead. So I bought my house about 3 years ago. It's a nice 3-bedroom in a quiet suburban neighborhood, perfect for me since I work from home and needed a dedicated office space. The house came with what I was told was a shared driveway situation with the neighbor. The driveway runs between my house and the neighbor's house, and it is wide enough for about 4 cars to park side by side. There's also enough length for cars to park behind each other if needed. When I bought the place, my realtor explained that the previous owners of both houses had always shared the driveway amicably with an informal agreement. Nothing was written down, people just worked it out like reasonable adults. I parked on what I considered my side, closer to my house, and the neighbors at the time parked on their side. We would wave at each other, occasionally chat about the weather, and that was that. You know, typical normal neighbor stuff. But then about 8 months ago, the old neighbors moved away. They were a retired couple who decided to downsize and move closer to their grandkids. Sweet people, I was sad to see them go. Their house sat empty for maybe 2 months before it sold. Now enter Karen. I first saw Karen on moving day. She pulled up in a massive SUV, the kind that probably gets 12 miles to the gallon, and immediately took up 2 parking spots in the driveway. I didn't think much of it at first. Moving day is chaos. I mean, people need space for trucks and helpers and all of that, and I parked on the street for the day to give them some room. No big deal, right? A week later, Karen had not moved her SUV from those 2 spots, not even once. And then her husband's truck appeared, then a sedan, and then the kids appeared, 5 of them. The youngest looked about 14 or 15, and the oldest was probably in their early 20s. All of them apparently had driver's licenses or permits. Well, within a month of moving in, Karen's family had 6 vehicles. Her SUV, her husband's truck, and 4 cars for the kids. Our shared driveway that comfortably fit 4 cars was now expected to handle 7 vehicles, including mine, and I tried to be patient. I really did. I introduced myself a few days after they moved in, brought over some cookies, and tried to be a good neighbor. Karen barely looked at me. She took the cookies, said thanks without smiling, and closed the door in my face. Okay, maybe she was stressed from the move, I let it go, but the parking situation kept getting worse. Every day when I went out to my car, there would be one of Karen's kids' cars parked behind mine, blocking me in. I would have to go knock on their door, ask someone to move. The first few times they did it without much complaint, just some eye rolls from the teenagers, but then Karen started answering the door with an attitude. You know, if you didn't park so far back in their driveway, you wouldn't get blocked in, she said to me once. I park in the same spot I've always parked, I replied. The same spot where I parked for 2 years before you moved in. Well, things change. We have 6 drivers in this family and you're just one person. You should be more flexible. I should be more flexible? Right. It got even worse from there. Karen's family started parking in what had always been my spot. One morning, I woke up to find 3 of their cars completely taking over my side of the driveway, leaving me no space at all. I had to park on the street. When I mentioned this to Karen, she shrugged and said, "First come, first serve." That's not how shared driveways work, I said, trying to keep my cool. Well, it's how this one works now, she replied and shut the door. I started documenting all this crap that was happening. About 6 weeks after Karen moved in, things escalated dramatically. And by the way, guys, I'm just curious, if a neighbor moved in next to you and you had this shared driveway and that new neighbor would act the same way as the Karen in this story, would you let this go on for 6 weeks or would you have acted earlier? Let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, please don't forget to like the video because that would help me tremendously with the algorithm. Thanks a lot. I came home from running errands to find a notice under my door. The notice informed me that I was hereby required to cease and desist using the driveway. I wish I was joking here. This woman really sent me a cease and desist letter, and the letter claimed that according to some old documents she found, the entire shared driveway actually belonged to her property. She said now that she owned the property, she was formally revoking my permission to use the driveway at all. She graciously gave me 7 days to make alternative parking arrangements. I laughed out loud when I read it, but then I got angry. Then I called a lawyer. A lawyer who I will call Connor was very interested in my situation. He suggested we do a proper title search and survey of both properties before even responding to Karen's ridiculous letter. I agreed with this. If this was gonna turn into a legal battle, I wanted all my facts straight. And what we found was absolutely beautiful. So the surveyor came out a few days later. They checked the original monuments, which are basically the permanent markers that define property boundaries, and they did their calculations. They marked everything with stakes and flags, and when they were done, they showed me the results. The driveway was not shared. It never was. The entire driveway, every square inch of it, was completely on my property. The property line between my lot and Karen's lot was not where everyone assumed it was. It was actually about 15 feet closer to Karen's house. Her property line ended well before the driveway even started. I made the surveyor repeat that 3 times because I couldn't even believe it. What had happened, as best as Connor could figure out from the old records, was that decades ago, the original owners of both properties were family members, brothers or cousins or something like that, and they had an informal arrangement where the family on what was now Karen's lot could use the driveway, even though it was entirely on the other lot. Over the years, as the properties changed hands multiple times, everyone just assumed it was a shared driveway because that's how it had always been used, but it was never legally shared. It was my property and the previous owners of Karen's lot had simply been allowed to use it out of neighborly goodwill. Karen's property actually had its own legal driveway access. It was a narrow strip of land on the other side of her lot that connected to the side street. At some point, probably when her lot was still owned by the original family, someone had let it become overgrown because, I mean, why would you use a narrow, inconvenient access point when your cousin lets you use his nice wide driveway? So over the decades, that strip had been ignored. It was technically still her property and still provided legal street access, but it was covered in bushes and hadn't been maintained as a usable driveway in probably 30 or 40 years. I sat on this information for a few days, just enjoying the irony really. Karen tried to claim that my driveway was hers, but in reality, she had no claim to it whatsoever, and her own property came with its own access that she didn't even know about. Connor sent Karen a formal response to her cease and desist letter. It was beautiful, very professional, very legal, and obviously devastating for her. The letter explained that according to the official survey and title records, the driveway was entirely the property of me, and Karen's property had no legal right to use the driveway and never had. Any previous use had been by informal permission only, permission that could be revoked at any time. The letter went on to say that given her recent attempt to claim ownership of my property, I was formally revoking any implied permission for her or her family to use my driveway. However, being a reasonable person, I was willing to offer her an easement, a legal right to continue using a portion of the driveway in exchange for fair compensation. This easement would come with a monthly fee of $500, a figure Connor suggested based on what commercial parking space rent for in our area and the wear and tear on my property from 6 vehicles using it daily. The offer would remain open for 30 days. I expected Karen to come storming over immediately. Instead, I got silence for about a week, and then her husband showed up at my door looking sheepish. He asked if maybe we could work something out. He seemed like a decent enough guy, honestly, just completely beaten down by his wife. I told him the offer stood still, $500 a month, take it or leave it. Honestly, I set the price high because I expected her to negotiate. A reasonable person would have countered with something lower and we could have worked something out, but Karen was not reasonable. He left without committing to anything, and a few days later I got a letter from Karen's lawyer. It was a lot of bluster about historical use and adverse possession and how they would be pursuing legal action if I didn't back down. Connor laughed when he read it. Adverse possession doesn't apply here, he explained. Adverse possession, which is basically the legal term for squatters' rights, requires someone to use property exclusively for a really long time, like they actually own it. But since my property's owners had always been using the driveway too, their use was never exclusive. Plus, they never acted like they owned it until Karen showed up making demands. Connor sent back a response reiterating our position and noting that the offer would expire in 3 weeks. If Karen wanted to use my driveway, she could pay for the privilege, otherwise she was welcome to use her own property's legal access point on the side street. The 30 days came and went with no agreement. I gave it an extra week just to be nice to her, but then I called the contractor. The fence went up on a beautiful Saturday morning, enjoying a quiet weekend before the chaos started. I was having my coffee on the front porch when the crew arrived. I had hired them to install a nice solid wood fence right along the property line, exactly where the surveyor had marked it. The fence effectively cut off Karen's access to the driveway entirely. It was on my property and I had every right to fence it, and I made sure to get all the proper permits, so everything was completely above board. Karen lost her mind. She came running out of her house, screaming before the first post was even in the ground. She threatened to call the police and she threatened to sue me. She threatened to tear the fence down herself. The workers ignored her. I just smiled and waved from my porch, but the police did show up eventually. Karen had called them claiming I was blocking her access to her property. The officer looked at the survey, looked at the permits, looked at the fence being built entirely on my land and told Karen there was nothing illegal happening here. She then, of course, screamed at him too. He left, the fence went up. Now here's where the real revenge kicks in though. Over the next few weeks I watched the fallout with satisfaction, but the best part was yet to come. Remember that narrow strip of land Karen was supposed to use for her driveway access from the side street? Well, when my surveyor was doing his work, he noticed something odd about it. I had him look into it further, and it turns out that strip of land was not actually part of Karen's property either. It was an easement that had been granted by my property to hers decades ago for driveway access. An easement that, according to the original documents, could be revoked if the benefiting property owner ever made a legal claim against the granting property owner. Karen's lawsuit against me triggered that clause, and my lawyer filed the appropriate paperwork, and just like that, Karen lost her legal right to use that site access too. She now has to negotiate with the neighbor on the other side of her property for access, and from what I've heard, that neighbor already cannot stand her. So not only did I take back my driveway, I effectively took away her backup option too. She tried to steal my driveway and ended up losing all convenient access to her property. Karen tried to have the fence torn down, of course. She even filed an emergency motion claiming she was being denied access to her property. The judge denied it, pointing out that the driveway was never her property to begin with and she had known alternative access points even if they were inconvenient. The denial of the easement was also upheld as valid under the original terms. Sometime after the fence went up, Karen's husband came to my door alone. He looked exhausted. He practically begged me to reconsider. He said Karen was making everyone's life miserable. The kids were at each other's throats because there was nowhere convenient to park, and they'd already sold at least 2 of their cars because they simply couldn't fit them anywhere accessible. I almost felt bad for him, but I remembered all the times Karen had blocked me in, all the times she had dismissed my concerns, and all the smugness when she thought she was gonna take away my driveway. I told him my offer had expired, the fence stays. A few weeks after the husband's visit, I received notice that Karen had actually filed a lawsuit against me. She was claiming the survey was fraudulent, that the fence was an illegal structure, and that I was intentionally interfering with her property rights. She wanted the fence removed, damages for emotional distress, and a permanent easement at no cost. The lawsuit dragged on for a few months. Karen apparently had trouble keeping legal representation. When the hearing finally happened, it was almost anticlimactic. The judge reviewed the survey, the title history, my permits, and Karen's claims. He dismissed everything. He noted that the survey was conducted by a licensed professional, that the property records were clear, and that I had every right to fence my own property. He also pointed out that Karen had made no attempt to maintain her own legal access point in the time since the fence went up, which suggested she was not actually experiencing the hardship that she claimed. But then came the best part. Because Karen's lawsuit was found to be frivolous, the judge awarded me attorney fees. Karen had to pay for Connor's time, which by that point was considerable, and that brings us to today. It's been almost a year since Karen moved in and the fence has been up for the better part of that year. Karen still lives next door, but I barely see her anymore. She's apparently found some arrangement with the neighbor on the other side of her lot, though from what I hear, it involves a very narrow and very inconvenient access point that she had to pay significantly to arrange. Her family can barely fit 2 cars back there now, and that's being generous. Between the cramped parking situation and the legal fees, they ended up selling off a couple of their vehicles. Last I counted, they are down to 3 cars for the whole family. I occasionally see the older kids walking to the bus stop or getting rides from their friends. It brings me more joy than it probably should. Don't mess with people's property, folks, especially when you don't actually know what you're talking about. And yeah guys, let me know in the comments whether you think OP was an a-hole in this story or not. Comment number 1 said, not the a-hole. This is the absolute definition of F around and find out. Honest to God, the audacity of this woman is staggering. She moves in with a fleet of 6 vehicles, blocks you in constantly, and then instead of being grateful that you were patient with her chaotic circus, she sends you a cease and desist letter? That was the moment she signed her own death warrant, it seems. She tried to bully you out of your own property based on old documents, and she clearly didn't understand, so she deserves absolutely zero sympathy for the legal smackdown that followed. Also, you were actually generous. $500 a month for parking space for that many cars is a steal in most suburbs. She should have taken the deal, but her ego wouldn't let her. The husband sounds like he's suffering, but he enabled her entitlement until it was too late. Enjoy your quiet, fence-protected porch. Comment number 2, unpopular opinion here, but YTA. Look, I get it, Karen is a nightmare, sending a cease and desist was a declaration of war, but you went nuclear when you really didn't have to, and you seem to be taking way too much pleasure in the suffering of the rest of the family. You admitted the husband seemed like a decent enough guy who was just beaten down by his wife. When he came to your door practically begging and looking exhausted because his kids were at each other's throats, you had the chance to be the bigger person. You could have offered the easement again or negotiated, but instead you shut him down cold because of his wife's behavior. The fence was fair play, but revoking the side street access felt vindictive. You knew that strip was their backup plan, and you used the legal technicality to strip away that too just because she filed a lawsuit. You watched them sell off their cars and struggle with glee. Being legally right doesn't mean you are not being an a-hole. You cornered a family of 7 and forced them into a financial hole just to prove a point. And the next one is a petty revenge story which is titled Speakerphone Madness. I just discovered this subreddit, so I thought I would share. 2 years ago, I was with a coworker traveling out west. Midday, we stopped at a Denny's for lunch and the restaurant was empty. By the way, guys, I love Denny's. Middle of nowhere in Utah, the waitress let us pick our seat and we sat in a corner by a window. She took our drink orders and within a minute, a man came into the empty restaurant, took the booth next to us and started screaming into his phone, which was on speaker, of course. We sat there getting angrier with every passing second, listened to this guy argue with his wife about ticket costs on Southwest Airlines, whether his mother needing wheelchair assistance would allow them all to board early, long-term parking costs and so on. His wife has her brother join the call, and they all start screaming at each other in their native dialect. My friend and I are giving this guy glares, and he just glares back and keeps shouting. So then I got up, took the booth on the other side of the man, with his booth now between my coworker and I called my coworker. He immediately understood, put me on speaker, I put him on speaker, and we start shouting at each other saying, "I don't care what time it is, I'm having French toast. I hope they do the thing where they give you the extra milkshake in the metal cup." The waitress comes to our table, immediately understands what's going on. The random guy and his family are all agitated now, and we can hear him yelling even louder into his phone, one hand over an ear. I'm shouting my order through the phone and my coworker is relaying it to the waitress 6 feet away. She goes along with it. "Ask your friend how he takes his eggs. How do you want your eggs? Scrambled." This goes on for 2 solid minutes until the guy stands up, shouts, "You damn assholes," and storms out. We are laughing and the waitress is laughing. I of course gave her a giant tip, ate in peace, which was my only real petty revenge. And the next one is a story from r/FHOA, and it is titled, "My HOA decided I cannot have things I enjoy in my backyard." And by the way, if you enjoy these HOA stories, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you so much. So I live in a very small HOA where almost all of the houses are in a straight line on one side of our road. I live halfway down the road with a lake on each side of my lot that takes up most of the backyards of the other homes. I also like trees, so many neighbors designed their homes so they see my tree-filled yard across the lakes from inside their homes. Initially, some neighbors did not even have curtains on their windows facing my backyard. Several people on our architecture committee disliked that I saw into their yards and homes when I was in my backyard, so they decided I couldn't have anything I enjoy in my yard that is not right beside my house, to keep me out of most of my backyard basically. They even put this as a reason for rejecting improvements. One committee member said she liked to change her disabled daughter's diapers where she could see into my yard and rejected the structure in the back of my yard because I would be able to see back. The thought of adding curtains and closing them was foreign to her. She and others were also furiously against me putting up a privacy fence because it would block their view into my yard. The first improvement was a volleyball net for my daughter and me to get some exercise. A neighbor on the opposite side of one of the lakes had one that was never submitted to the HOA, but it could only be seen over the top of his 6-foot privacy fence. So then I put mine in a clearing among the trees in my backyard. It was the only level spot in my yard large enough. It turned out my volleyball net did not need HOA approval. The HOA board consulted 3 attorneys that all told them what they did was wrong. But the board put out minutes implying they were right. When legal threats did not work, they resorted to insults and said that I was a bad neighbor for not doing what they demanded. My HOA spent thousands in legal fees and was not able to block any of my improvements. This was not the only reason used for the rejections, but it was a frequent one and one of the most bizarre ones. And the next one is a malicious compliance story, which is titled "Mortgage Sold to a Company That Wants to Charge Me $14.95 to Pay My Bill Online." So I sent them a check every week for 1/4 the amount instead. So I figured someone here might get a kick out of this. Last year, for like the 6th time since we bought our house, our mortgage was sold to yet another company. I've never been late paying it. I've had occasionally made extra payments, never had any issues. But this new company wants to charge me $14.95 convenience fee to take a payment online. This is absolutely stupid. I can make a payment over the phone and pay another fee, or I can mail a check/money order for no fee. I could also set up autopay, giving them access to my bank account, but that's a hard no from me. So I went online, and my bank has a neat bill pay service where you can set it to repeat weekly, monthly, etc. So I took the monthly payment, rounded it up a bit, then set my bank to cut them a check every week for a bit over 1/4 the amount. Doesn't cost me a dime, I don't even pay postage, but I'm sure the money comes out of the account a little earlier than the mortgage company actually gets it, losing me a tiny bit of interest or something. But man, it makes me feel better that for trying to charge me $15 for what is essentially an automated process for them, they now get to process 4 to 5 checks a month. And I'm sure they have that whole process down to an art for minimal human interaction, but it's not zero. I really wanted to press my luck and send 1/30th of the payment every day, but I figured my bank might cut me off at that point. And yeah guys, thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.